Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Shropshire Pilot vlogcast. I'm Luke, a student helicopter pilot from Shropshire, and I'm documenting my experience without leaving anything out so you can see what it's really like. Along the way, I'll be sharing things I wish I'd known before I started, so unless you're already flying for the Red Arrows or Red Bull, I'm sure you'll find these videos useful. Today we're taking a deep dive into getting your first medical certificate, what to look out for when choosing a flight school, and the different ways you can fund your flight training. Let's do this. In my last video, I suggested booking a taster lesson to find out if flying is right for you. If you've already done that and can't wait to fly again, then you need to get a medical certificate because without one you can't get a pilot license, so look into it now before you commit to spending thousands on flight training. As with anything health related, this can be quite daunting, but I'm going to explain the whole process so you know what to expect. Whether you want to fly for fun or as a career, we all start at the same point with the Private Pilot License, or PPL, which allows you to act as pilot in command, or PIC, on non-commercial operations. The minimum medical certificate you need for this is called a Class 2. If once you've got the PPL you decide you'd like to be paid to fly, you'll need the Commercial Pilot License, or CPL, which requires a Class 1 medical certificate. There are other licenses with different medical requirements, such as the Light Aircraft Pilot License, or LAPL, and the National Private Pilot License, or NPPL, but I'll just be covering the PPL and CPL for now. In the UK, the Civil Aviation Authority, or CAA, is responsible for issuing licenses and regulating aviation. Basically, a Class 1 is more strict because you need it to fly commercially, so if you just want to fly for fun, simply get a Class 2. However, if your goal is to fly for a living, you should still consider getting a Class 1 even though the PPL doesn't require it, because you'll have a big problem if you can't get a Class 1 later on. So how exactly do you go about getting a medical certificate? Well, what's referred to as your initial or first assessment can only be carried out by an authorised medical examiner, or AME. There are several of these up and down the country, all charging roughly the same amount, so just do a Google search to find the one closest to you, but make sure you include the word initial because not all AMEs are authorised to do these. Mine ended up costing almost £1,000 due to my medical history, which I'll talk about shortly, but it's usually around £600, and once you have the certificate it can be revalidated or renewed by any AME at a lower cost of about £170. So what's the actual medical assessment like? I can only speak from my experience, which to be honest wasn't very straightforward, but most pilots get their certificates on the same day as their assessment, so don't be put off. In 2017, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. I had an operation to remove the tumour, as well as a dose of chemotherapy, and now I'm essentially cured. I also have lower back problems, hay fever, and white coat hypertension, which hilariously means my otherwise normal blood pressure is abnormally high when I'm in the company of a medical professional. Despite all this, I still managed to get a Class 1, so if you're going for yours, hopefully that puts your mind at rest. I booked my assessment with Aeromedical Consulting at Birmingham International Airport after the first wave of COVID-19 and had to wait 2 months, which was actually good because it gave me some time to prepare. I've always lived a relatively healthy lifestyle, but stepped it up by exercising more and doing Sober October for Macmillan Cancer Support. I also acquired my medical records and bought a home blood pressure monitor so I could show normal readings to the AME. When it came to the day of the assessment, I set off bright and early after drinking what would prove to be too much water for the requested urine sample. It turns out that they only want a small vial, not a bucketful, so that's something to bear in mind. Anyway, swiftly moving on, after a short wait I was called into a small room by a nurse who checked my personal details before recording my height, weight and eye colour. Next, she monitored my heart rate and blood pressure and used a finger prick test to check my cholesterol levels, a mouth swab and breathalyzer test coupled with my crystal clear urine sample to make sure I wasn't drunk or high, and a lung function test where you just exhale rapidly into a tube. This was followed by an electrocardiogram, or ECG, where you lie down and have sensors attached to you to check your heart function, and at this point she had a second attempt at taking my blood pressure. Up next was an audiogram where you're stuffed into a small box and asked to listen through headphones to a series of progressively quietening beeps in each ear and click a button when you hear them. Following that, I went into another room to have my eyes tested by an optician, which started with the usual test we've probably all had, along with a colour blindness test. It then moved on to a bizarre peripheral vision test where you put your head in a concave plastic structure and with one eye obscured and the other looking straight ahead, click a button when you see little white lights around the edges of your field of view. Once all this testing was finally done, I went to see the doctor, who summarised the results and tried again to get a normal blood pressure reading, but unfortunately all three were over the required 140/90 and he couldn't accept my home readings. My total cholesterol levels were also over the required amount, and my case had to be referred due to my cancer, so unfortunately they couldn't give me my certificate on the day. With this homework to do, I went to my local doctor, who was able to provide a lipid profile blood test that showed my cholesterol levels were normal, but even he couldn't get a good blood pressure reading from me. Luckily, my dad, a now retired doctor, was able to arrange for me to borrow a 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure monitor, which you wear for a whole day and night while it squeezes your arm every 30 minutes. Fortunately, the results of this were normal, so everything was forwarded to the AME and then sent on to the CAA to double check. This whole process meant that I didn't actually know whether or not I'd passed the medical until they got in touch on Christmas Eve of all days. It took a further month for the certificate to arrive in the post, but after everything I'd been through, it was a huge relief to have been given the green light to start my flight training. Once you've got your medical, it's time to decide where you're going to learn to fly, and it doesn't necessarily have to be where you took your trial flight. My first flight was with Tiger helicopters at Shropshire Airfield, but after weighing up all the options, I decided to train with Wizard helicopters at Welshpool Mid Wales Airport, who I highly recommend. There are two main training routes, integrated and modular. Integrated means you sign up to a full-time set program, often paying a large sum up front and maybe even relocating so you can focus solely on the training. Modular is the opposite of this. You go at your own pace so you can fit the training in around your other responsibilities. Integrated is typically quicker but more strict, and modular is more relaxed but can take longer. There are also two types of flight school: approved training organisations or ATOs and declared training organisations or DTOs. Both are held to strict standards and regularly checked by CAA inspectors, but ATOs offer more courses so receive more scrutiny. Generally speaking, if you want to fly commercially, train with an ATO, otherwise a DTO is perfectly fine. Another important consideration for aspiring commercial pilots is whether or not the ATO they're training with has an Air Operator Certificate or AOC. This allows them to conduct commercial operations such as pleasure and charter flights, which means they could be your first employer, so if the opportunity comes up to get involved in the day-to-day running of the business, take it, and remember you're demonstrating what you like to work with, so be helpful and have fun. Other considerations include the maintenance schedules of their aircraft, the amenities available at the airport, how busy it is and how long it takes to drive there, but perhaps most importantly, how it feels to you. Take it all in and talk with as many people as you can, because you'll be spending a lot of time and money there. That brings us on to the financial side of things, and there's no two ways about it, flying is expensive. A lot of aspiring pilots, myself included, are lucky enough to have relatives who can help them out, and although there are grants and scholarships available, they're extremely competitive, so shouldn't be relied on. Alternatively, a bank loan could be an option, but wherever the money comes from, try and budget to make it last so you avoid breaks in your training, especially if you take the modular route. Nobody really likes to talk about money, but you need to know what you're getting yourself into, so expect to spend at least £15,000 on the PPL, and by the time you finish the CPL, you'll probably have spent around £50,000. Unless you take the integrated route or live with your parents, there's also the issue of paying your bills while you're training, and it can sometimes be difficult to line up your schedule with your instructors, especially when the weather gets in the way. I chose the modular route and started my training during the first lockdown of 2020, but due to the restrictions couldn't do my job as drummer, so worked as a delivery driver and cleaner instead. This meant that I could balance flying with work throughout the week, which is something I've kept doing now live music is allowed again. If you have a full-time job, your only option might be busy flying weekends, unless you can reduce your hours or go part-time. It's challenging, but can be done, and once you get the bug, you'll move heaven and earth to fly. So that's it for today's episode, and I hope I didn't overwhelm you with all those details. As you'll discover, aviation is quite complex, so if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or contact me on Instagram or TikTok, and I'll do my best to help. Next time, I'll be showing you around the airport I fly at, talking about the ground school exams you need to take, and what training materials you should and shouldn't buy. Have a great day and happy flying.